Lifting belts. What do they do, and should you be using one? Lifting purists will say that you shouldn't wear a belt ever, that it's doing the work for you and it doesn't count as raw lifting if you're wearing the belt, which is a reference to raw versus equipped powerlifting. Others will say that you shouldn't wear a belt unless you can squat your body weight and deadlift at least 1.5 times your body weight. And then there are others again who will put on their belt as they walk out of the change rooms and leave it on for their entire session, regardless of the lifts that they're doing. So who's right? When should you wear a belt? A lifting belt increases intra-abdominal pressure by giving you tactile feedback or proprioceptive cues to brace your core properly when you are lifting heavy loads. Intra-abdominal pressure creates stability and helps to create an effective force transfer through your body, back to the analogy of being the sledgehammer and not a pool noodle when you are lifting heavy loads. Note that this isn't about pushing your abs out into the belt. It's about creating intra-abdominal pressure and having that feedback so that you brace your core effectively throughout the lift. By increasing intra-abdominal pressure, wearing a belt could increase your maximal capacity by 5 to 15%, basically meaning that you'll be able to lift heavier. However, the belt isn't doing the work for you. You're not going to be able to do something that your body isn't already capable of just by putting on a belt. It's helping you improve your bracing mechanics so that you can lift heavier and safer. As a lifting belt is designed to help you increase your intra-abdominal pressure, it's important that you've spent some time training without a belt so you understand the proper breathing and bracing mechanics. If you can't do this, adding a belt won't save you. Only once you've spent some time training without a belt and have a solid foundation and proficiency in squatting and deadlifting, and you want to test your abilities under maximal loads, would I recommend adding a lifting belt. So once you've decided that you want to add a lifting belt to your training, it comes down to finding one that fits your needs and your budget. There's a range of belts on the market, and the main variations between the belts are in the thickness, the width, and the way the belt is secured. Firstly, in terms of width, you want a belt that is a uniform width the whole way around. Some have a tapered front, but it's more beneficial to have a uniform width so that you have an even surface to brace against. Most commonly, belts are 10 centimeters or 4 inches wide, as this is what suits most people and is generally the maximum width in most powerlifting federations. If you have a narrower gap in between your rib cage and your hip bones, you may want to look at getting a 3-inch belt so that it doesn't pinch your torso as you squat or deadlift. The thickness of a belt determines the rigidity of it. So the thicker the belt, the more rigid and the less mobile it is. The thicker belts are generally designed for less dynamic movements such as squats and deadlifts, and thinner belts are better for dynamic movements such as the Olympic weightlifting movements. 13 millimeters is usually the maximum thickness of a lifting belt, as it's really stiff and is generally only used by people who are lifting really heavy loads and require that extra support and don't want their belt to be mobile. 10 millimeter belts are more common and are suited to most lifters, as they provide that stability and support while also still allowing you to move. There are also thinner belts available that are more pliable, that don't offer as much support, which are good for dynamic movements where you might not need as much support, but having that tactile feedback is really helpful. The 3 ways a belt is secured is either prong, lever, or Velcro. Prong belts come in either double or single prong. However, double prong generally doesn't offer any more support than a single prong and is actually harder to get on and off. But prong belts in general are handy because they are able to be easily adjusted depending on the clothes you're wearing or how bloated you feel day to day. A lever belt is really quick to release after a lift, and you don't have to take the belt all the way off so that you have room to breathe, whereas with a prong belt, you would take the whole belt off because it's not going to stay on you once you've released the tightness. Lever belts are also secured with the same tightness so that you know it's in the best spot for you. However, if you are wearing thicker clothes or you're a little bit more bloated one day, it's not going to feel very comfortable, and adjusting a lever belt is not something you want to be doing every session. Velcro belts are predominantly used in CrossFit as they're able to be easily adjusted. So an athlete could wear it for the strength portion of a WOD and then easily adjust it for the remaining movements. Velcro belts don't provide as much stability as the other belts, but they do give you a little bit of feedback, which can be helpful if you just need a little bit of support. For most general lifters, a 3 to 4 inch belt that is 10 millimeters thick will be sufficient for what they're using it for. It's not necessary to wear your belt for the entire session or even wear it every session. If you're lifting at 80% or above of your max and you're not doing a specific beltless session, then I'd recommend putting your belt on for your last warm-up and then your working sets. Where there's significant spinal loading, such as squats and deadlifts, a belt is encouraged, and it might even be helpful for overhead pressing and Olympic lifts. Some people like to wear it for benching, however it's not really necessary, so this really comes down to personal preference and whether you need the belt there to give you that feedback to make sure you're bracing your core when you're benching. So, final verdict. It's not necessary to get a lifting belt. You don't have to have one. You can train perfectly fine without a belt. However, if you have a solid foundation of bracing and lifting mechanics, you have the budget for it and you want to invest in a belt, then it can be a helpful assistive tool.